Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. Some noise. We just had a snack, some sugar. Before I start, I just want to say this is a beautiful, beautiful space. And I've given a bunch of talks, and this one is probably the most special by far. So well done, Charles. Well done, Joe, and thank you for having me. So my name is Ariel. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm going to be talking about making money on the App Store. And let's talk about what most people think when it comes to making apps. And tell me if this is right or wrong. One, you build a great app. Two, you put it on the App Store. Three, and then money. But you've heard from a bunch of people today and Christina yesterday that money is not that easy to come by on the App Store these days. And that's true to an extent. I believe that the reason that is happening is because the industry is maturing, and as that's happening, your apps are turning into businesses. They're not just home run successes on their own. And when you have a business, you have to think about how to treat it like a business and grow it like a business. So usually I give a talk about how to take your app and consider it a business and what that means for developers. But this is a brand new talk that I've never given before. Hopefully it's good. Which focuses only on the money-making part and the strategy, which I believe is the key to actually succeeding on the App Store and having a chance on the App Store. So keep this in mind, and let me tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Ariel. I started my first company in 2002 when I graduated high school. It failed immediately. I can tell you why later. I studied marketing, and I really like business, but I also do a lot of coding. I learned to program on my own, and I've built a whole bunch of web businesses, all platforms, ever since. So in 2008, the App Store opened up, and me and my brother decided to make some games and put them on the App Store. And that really gave us that insight into this is a business. And if we want to stop everything that we've been doing before and concentrate on this, we have to treat it as such. The problem is tools didn't exist back in 2008 to have any sort of analytics on your business. So we built one, and it was a weekend project, turned into something completely different, and I've been doing that since 2009. It's called appFigures, and I've spoken to a bunch of you who are appFigures members, which is amazing. Just a show of hands, how many appFigures folks do I have in the crowd? Holy Moses. Awesome. Thanks to all of you. So for those of you who did not raise your hand, the few, appFigures is a business analytics platform for app makers. We don't estimate downloads. We don't do any of that. We actually take all of your data from all the different platforms, and we bring it into one place, organize it, clean it up, and make it really easy to access so you can see what's going on. We have an app, which you're seeing in the video. We don't require an SDK because we plug in to all the app stores directly. And we don't sell any of your data. We're very private, which is something that is very important to us. We think your data is your data. And we're also very affordable. And I'll explain what affordable means and why it's not free later as I get into the talk. So the App Store is a busy place. And let's talk about some numbers. More than 2 million apps, and that's really just a lot of apps. And Apple has recently been cleaning them up, removing some old ones and trying to get rid of some of the crap ones. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on stage, but they've been doing a great job. Number is still really high, so that's not changing. We estimated the rate to be 2.3 apps per minute. So I'm going to be on stage for about 45 minutes, maybe even less. About 100 apps are going to be built in that time span. Isn't that crazy? 100 apps are going to be released, not built, in that time span. So what do you do? Is there even money in this? The gold rush is over. You've heard all these things. But what do? We're still here, right? We're all making apps. We're all trying to make money on the App Store. And there is money on the App Store. There are more devices right now in the hands of users than ever before. China is in part a huge addition to that. The iPhone 7 Plus is a huge addition to that. And who knows what else is coming? Devices are just going to continue growing. And money is going to continue being pumped out to developers. $50 billion. That's quite a lot of money. I want a chunk of that, don't you? So the real question is your app ready to make money? And I have a feeling a bunch of you are saying in your heads, yes, definitely. My app is so ready because it's awesome. I built in all the bells and all the whistles and all the features my users want. If that's all you're saying in your head, sadly, the answer is no. Your app is not ready. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but a great app is just a good starting point to be successful on the App Store. And I don't mean to be negative about building great apps. I think great apps are necessary. They're the foundation of a great business. But it's only one side of it. And there's a whole other side for which we have this conversation today. So I'm going to talk about the other most important thing. And just like Matt said before, I don't have all the answers. What I do have is a lot of questions. And I think that once you get a sense of the questions, you can actually assess the situation. So I'm going to put out a few questions for you to really get you thinking about what does it mean to make money on the App Store and what does it mean for your app to make money on the App Store, and give you a framework for thinking about how to do that for every app in kind of a more scientific way. So the other thing is you have to think about making money before you build your app. I know, it's crazy. And you're probably thinking, oh, making money, that's crazy. I want to do that, but I don't want to think about that. And it's difficult. And it's one of those things that is usually done as an afterthought. And I bet you if I ask now, and I'm not going to ask because I don't want to do that to people, but how many of you thought about your monetization model after making an app? I bet you I'll see a whole bunch of hands. I asked not to, but still. So it's a real problem. And the real problem with it is that after you make the app, sometimes it's not as easy to actually shift and change and make change based on how you want to monetize. And if you can't make that change, you can't make money. And if you can't make money, you're not going to be here next year. And we want you here next year. So let's look at what it should look like. Figure out your monetization, everything else. And you'll be happy. Who wants to be happy? I know I do. So, okay, I have 4 easy steps. I don't know about easy, but 4 steps for you to think about as you're trying to figure out your monetization before you're building your app. Now, I'm not saying don't think about your app at all. I'm saying take the idea you have for your app and analyze it based on these questions and figure out your monetization. Then build your app, and we'll see why that makes sense. So steps are really easy. Step number 1, identify your user. Figure out who's going to actually be consuming this app. And there's a set of questions that we're going to ask in a second to understand what that means for them and what they can give you. The second thing is understand your own economics. And I see a lot of developers making the same problem, or doing the same wrong thing, making the same mistake. That's where I was going with this. First time I'm doing this particular talk. And one of the biggest problems are, if you don't know your own economics, you're not going to be able to know what you need to be sustainable. Sustainability is a huge problem. And the old model was you get paid for an app. You get paid once, and whatever happens afterwards, whether it's updates or a back-end service, anything of that nature is up to you. And sometimes that model is not sustainable. And I'll get to an example in a few slides that shows you how one app had to shut down because it didn't think about those things in time and couldn't pivot fast enough. So then you'll have a bunch of questions. We'll answer them together, and you'll be able to pick a monetization model. There are a few big ones that most people are kind of accustomed to. We can mix and match them. But at the end of the day, the most important thing, once you find the one that works, is you actually have to experiment. And that's scary. That was scary for me when I started experimenting with pricing. I bet you it's scary for a whole bunch of you out there. It works, and it's a necessity. So we'll talk about that, and we'll give a few examples. So let's talk about identifying your user. Sometimes that's what happens on the App Store. You think you're selling to one kind of user, and you're selling to a whole other. And that means a whole bunch of problems. So you should start by asking a few questions. So first of all, obviously, what kind of app do they need? And I'm not asking what kind of features do they need. I'm not asking what kind of service do they need. I'm asking what kind of app do they need. They have a problem and they need a solution. Is there anything that currently works? Even if it's still, if it could be used, because that is your competitor already. And then, what do they charge? Let's learn from our competitors. Easy peasy. But even more important is, what can this user pay? So users are able to pay a wide range of prices, and it depends on how much money we're saving them, how much time. I should switch to the next one. But we have to understand this before we pick a monetization model. If you're selling to someone who has the ability to pay $10 or $20, they may not want to, but they have the ability to. And that's something very important. And as we get to number 7, what kind of app do they want, and how much do they really want this app? Because if they have those $20 and they kind of want it, they're not going to give you 20 bucks. No way. But if they have 20 bucks and they really want it, they might give you 20 bucks. But then moving on to question number 8 is how much do they need this service? And I think if you think about all the apps you build, all the services you build, some users want them, some users need them. How do you get to those users who need them? Because they're going to take the $20 they have and give them to you and be happy about it. And actually go to their friends and say, hey, you should use this app. Or hey, you should use this service. I know from my own experience, when we started, there was nothing else like us. And we made life so easy for developers. In retrospect, we needed to do a lot more, but that's how I feel about everything in life. So realistically, we had a service everyone needed, and it just grew, spread like wildfire. And that's, I imagine, how a lot of you know about us, through a friend of a friend, through something on social media, through a blog post or a book or a meetup. We did not do any sort of investment into user acquisition or advertising, which are really, really expensive and problematic. So you have to know all of these different things. So next, you have to understand your own economics. We want this, right? I think it'll be kind of painful, but the idea of this, in theory, we want. So we have to understand what it means for us to be able to make this app and continue to maintain it and grow it. So what is it going to cost to make? Now, you're probably thinking, I know how to make apps. It doesn't cost me anything. But it does, because you have to pay rent. Now, how much does it cost to maintain? And I know this is a shocker. You're going to have to maintain your app. You're going to need to release updates. It's proven that releasing updates actually increases your rank on the App Store. And discovery is a shit show, as I heard yesterday. So you want to be up at the top. And if you're not producing updates, if you're not continuing to maintain this app, 1, you're going to lose users. 2, no one's going to see you. So it's just a recipe for failure. So then number 3 is, where's all this new stuff going to come from? Is it something you make? And I had a conversation with Yono in the back over there, and we talked about content. Hello. And we talked about content, and content is a very important piece in coming up with a strategy that's actually sustainable for you and takes you from that one price paid up front to a monetization that is actually structured and gives you the ability to predict the kind of revenue you want. And are there any fees or anything involved in that? Because that's something you have to take into account. So how often you would need to update is very, very important, because it means whether you can be on the beach for like a month and then do a quick update and move on with life, whether you need to actually continue to look at a server and make sure every request is getting handled. And can you do it all alone? That could be a lot of work. And it usually is a lot of work. And the answer is, in most cases, no. You'll need someone else. Then, most important is, what do you need to keep the lights on? Because at the end of the day, we all do things we love, or we all try to do things we love. But that's not always the easiest way, and that's not always the most sustainable way to actually succeed. So we have to do a lot more, and we have to figure out that cost that we absolutely must have, so we can continue to have fun or to do what we really love. We need to know what it is. And then I added the number 8, really like last second. And I think most of us think about, how do we make enough money? But enough is a problem, because enough is enough now. It's not going to be enough tomorrow. And as things change, you have to think about growth. So you can't just be building for what you think you will need in the next 30 days. In any company, you will see this, where you're starting with an idea, and maybe it's a co-founder or 2. And then you hire a person, and you realize, crap, now I have to pay someone every week or every 2 weeks, or whatever it is. And then you hire another person because you need to do support. And now you have to pay all these different things, and that money will continue going out. So you have to make sure you understand what that means and be able to project that into the future. Oops. Now, there are a few gotchas to coming up with your own economics. And we've heard from Dave before about legal fees, and no one wants to be burning any money. But even talking to attorneys costs money. I learned this the hard way, and I think probably many of you have. You pick up the phone, and a few $100s is just done. Super easy. And that's the kind of cost you don't usually put into these sort of plans. You think, oh yeah, well, we'll probably do it once every year, and it'll be fine. Believe me, you need to think about it, and you need to actually add it up in a more realistic fashion. Accounting, you can do your own accounting, but like others have said, probably not the best use of your time, and they probably know more. And when something bad happens, it'll be your fault as opposed to someone else's fault. Never a good idea. Support. So I think support is probably one of the most important key components of any sort of service. And if you've ever talked to any of our support members, you will know that we take support really seriously. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. You can email us. We also have live chat, which has been solving issues really, really quickly. And for us, it's not a cost center. It's something that we want to do. We want to be able to offer that kind of safety net. You're starting to use a product, and it's very important that you know someone has your back if you need it. But that's expensive. Our team right now has grown from me doing all the support, which was a lot of fun but not realistic, to 3 dedicated people: a dedicated engineer, an account manager, and someone to handle all those emails and live chats. And that's an expense that you have to think about. And you're probably thinking, oh, you're a big service, blah, blah, blah. But even your app has a lot of support burden. And if you don't have it now, you will have it as you grow. So it's very important to keep that in the back of your mind. I added insurance after Dave's talk because I completely forgot about it. Sorry. And insurance is kind of a huge pain because you never know what you're getting yourself into, but you need to have it. So figure that out before and know your cost. And then one-off cost, because black or jet black is kind of a big question. Black or jet black? Okay, jet black myself. Super scratched, and it's been a couple of weeks. Not much to do. So, okay, now that we kind of have a framework for thinking about what does it mean for us to understand our user, and what does it mean for us to understand ourselves, we got to understand what's possible and what's available for us to actually monetize. So, this is super small. One, considering your answers. Look through all of them, make sure you understand them. Then, find one that satisfies both sides. It's not just about the user. If the user wants an app, they probably want a free app, and they don't care that you can't pay the bills. For them, it's not important at all. But it is important for you, because you need to pay the bills. So think about yourself and think about what the user can actually sustain. And then I have here 4 real monetization strategies, and you're probably familiar with all of these, and I have some numbers in the next slides. And then there's a hybrid option, a mix and match that we'll talk about. So the most obvious one that everyone is talking about, and 75% of the top grossing apps are actually using, is free within-app purchases. And let's stop and talk about that for a second. So the good side of free within-app purchases is it's really easy for the users. If you think about it, free, no risk. They download it, it's crap, they remove it, they move on with life. It's a very easy method to get more users. We'll get into why that's not always a good idea in a second, but it's also very, very flexible and really, really easy to experiment and optimize. So changing your price is probably something you think should never be done, but it should. And within-app purchases, that makes it really, really simple. You're not taking away anything from existing users. You're giving more to new users. That's very simple. Also, it allows you to do tier pricing, which is something the App Store doesn't really provide by default, with the exception of subscriptions that are new, and we'll get to them in a second. Oh, wait, I forgot a very important one. They're really easy to experiment with, which I said already, but it's very important mentioning again. You'll see why later. The bed. They get really complex. Have you tried implementing in-app purchases in your app, in an existing app? It's really difficult, especially if the app was not structured around the concept of in-app purchases. If it wasn't meant to give you data to trickle more data in or more content or whatever it is that you're doing, now you're going to have to re-architect the whole thing. Now, even if you're building an app from scratch that does that, there's still a lot of complexity to put in those gateways into getting more content in the hands of people. And now you need lock screens, and you need upgrade screen and upsell screens, and you need to be thinking about how do we get our free users who are really just abusing what we have given them and turning them into paid users. So it's not necessarily that easy, even though it seems like it when games do it. It requires constant optimization. What works today will not work tomorrow because all of your competitors will do the exact same thing, and you're going to need to change something. It also requires a lot of free users. Users are easy to come by. Paid users, not as easy. So with all that optimization from the second bullet point, you're going to have to put that into turning 1,000 free users into maybe 10 paying users. Now, that is just a random number that I just made up, but the economics of it are really, really similar in that sense. And if you have a free app with in-app purchases, you know that just getting a free user doesn't really mean anything. It's just the ability to convert them into something else. What happens? This clicker really doesn't like me. So next up, we have free with ads, and I think we all hate ads. I know I hate ads, but I'm going to start with the good because that's what I'm going to do. So they're very easy to implement. You throw them into your app, and they work. And what's actually astonishing about this is that the advertisers, they need you more than you need them. And that's something very important to keep in mind. There are more than 350 ad networks in use. Probably way more if we're counting the ones that are really tiny, but 350 big ones. And we poked at a lot of apps, and we tried to see who's using what. And the answer is everyone is using everything. And that's because you never know. You never know which one is going to give you the most benefit. So you throw them all in there and you hope for good. And that's kind of good because it means it's really easy. You throw in another line of code and boom, money-making machine. But it also has its downside. Now, the really cool thing about this is your users never pay a penny. And isn't that awesome? They give a truly free app. But there's always also problems with that. And because it's the kind of revenue that is based on something you have and you know how it's going to grow, your daily active users, it's something you can predict. And when you can predict your revenue, life is a lot nicer. You know how your growth is going to look like. You know when you can hire that other new person that you really need to have. You know when you can do some advertising campaign or something else. And it's that sort of peace of mind that gets you to make better decisions about your business. So we always strive for predictability. Now, it's also very easy to experiment with because you can throw in 351 ad networks or 478, however many of them you will find when you search on Google. But there's a lot of bad with ads. I focused on the money aspect of this, which is you get paid a fraction of a penny for 1,000 views in most cases. Now, there are a lot of new models that take this to new levels, but the bottom line is you get paid pennies for a lot. So you need to have a lot. You need to have thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of active users. Now, you could probably get it with the right app. I'm not trying to discourage. I'm just saying realistically, I know a lot of developers who did not think about monetizing. One of them is actually one of our engineers, built an app on the side, did not think about monetizing it. Just before submitting to the App Store, told me, Ariel, which ad network should I pick? I don't know. I have no idea. And he just picked one at random, put it in the app, and put the app on the App Store. He makes, I believe, like 60 cents a week. So that's not the way to go about any app. It might work for some apps that have a lot of users coming back and opening the app and going through a lot of sessions every day. Think about it when you're building your app. Is that the kind of app you want to have? But really kind of like the ugliest thing about ads is it changes the entire user experience. Users don't want ads. They don't understand ads in most cases. And if you read a lot of reviews on the App Store, you'll see that everything that has ads is getting at least like a half a star less than everything else. And you can see it on games. You see it more predominantly on apps, on regular apps, utilities, and lifestyle apps because you don't want it there. It's interrupting your everything. I downloaded a news app, and in the news app, they had ads right alongside all the news, but the ads were so much like the content that I got confused. And I clicked on it, and I got taken to the wrong place, and it wasn't pretty at all. So I wrote them an email, and I tried to explain that that's not the way to do it. And they said, well, it costs money to make an app. Now I'm going to have to email them back and explain to them that I know how to make money in apps. Maybe I'll send them a link to this talk. I'll see. Okay, it didn't double click. So paid apps. How many of you have paid apps? Oh, wow. Okay, we're going to have to change that. They're very simple. They're really, really very simple. You decide the pricing model, you decide the price tier, and you put it on the App Store. Now, the cool thing about them is that when you put a price on an app, you don't get those free users. So no one is really bothering you about something that is completely irrelevant. No one is bothering you without paying you, which is great. I kind of love that idea. As much as I love to do support, I want to not have to do support. Just have it there in case. It doesn't require making any changes to your app. So do whatever you want to do. Take an app that exists. Build a new app. Think about this last second. It's kind of okay. You didn't hear me say this. But it's also very easy to experiment with. Very, very easy. Because you can change the price and you'll see the number of downloads going down. If you open your email report or you open the app in the morning and you see that downloads are down 50%, you know you're going to make half the money. So the bad. Only 2 paid apps out of the top 100 grossing apps on the App Store. 2. And I believe one of them is NBA and the other is, I forgot what the other one is. But they're huge names that everyone knows. And that's the only reason people are going to the App Store, looking and thinking to themselves, okay, we're going to give the money before even seeing the goods. And I think that's something we really have to think about. Do we want to make an app that can get that sort of attention, can get to the point where random strangers are looking at it and are actually buying it? And with paid apps, that's very difficult. Very, very difficult. On iOS in general, 19% of apps, only 19% of apps are paid apps. What's shocking, and you probably know this, but it's terrible for business, 42% of those apps that are paid cost 99 cents. Now with a paid app, you only have the one chance to make money. So 42% of the time, you'll be making 99 cents. That's it. No room for growth. Cannot grow organically. It doesn't really matter what happens. You're making 99 cents on one user. Doesn't matter. What? Good point. 70 cents after Apple takes its cut. I was trying to be nice. I don't want to change the title of this talk. Now, we talked about the increase in perceived risk because people are looking at it and they're really asking themselves, should I buy this app? Now, if your app is one of a kind and there's nothing like it and they really need it, the answer is going to be yes. And you see this with business apps, with the utilities that are sometimes even really expensive. $20, $30 apps on the iPhone or on the iPad, people buy them. And those companies are making money. But it's a combination. They need the app, need not want. And there aren't many alternative solutions. A free app comes along, and believe me, the free app is going to get all the downloads first, even if it's terrible. People are going to throw that out and eventually maybe buy the paid app. But you lost that user, and now you may get that user back. And that's kind of a long journey. The good, and for some reason there's no header, 23% of the top 100 grossing apps. Oh, wait, how did I get here? Okay, this is why. First time, it's okay. So, subscriptions. We've all seen Apple really making a big push for subscriptions to WWDC, whether you saw the talks or not. It's very obvious. They even talked about subscriptions before subscriptions even happened, before they announced them. I thought was kind of weird. But there is a reason. We talked about recurring revenue and sustainability before, and we talked about just knowing what's going to happen and how that can change your business a few slides ago. And with subscriptions, you're really doing it. That's really the way to go. And if you take a look outside of just the app world, SaaS companies, software as a service, they've been booming. And that's because everyone likes the idea that, one, they can provide a service and get paid for that service, knowing that they will get paid tomorrow, and the day after, barring any catastrophes or any craziness, data leaks, blah, blah, blah. So the good thing is that 23% of the top grossing apps are already using subscriptions. So this is a proven way to make money if you have a service. Predictable, and they're really easy to experiment with. Hopefully you're getting the drift with really easy to experiment with at this point. The bad. I did not mean to do that. The bad, they require a service. You can't really sell a subscription without providing additional value or ongoing value. And I think that's going to be a huge problem as we get into this era of subscriptions. I'm going to freestyle in a second. But it requires some sort of a value to the user that's ongoing, which means it's something you have to maintain. So either you have to create new content ongoing, or you have to create a backend that will sync things or backup things or allow you to share things. All these things, they take a lot of effort. As someone who's built more than one backend to do just basic database stuff, I know that whether it seems simple or not, it's never going to be simple. And that's a cost that you have to take into account. So on the topic of subscriptions, I have this feeling that as we try to move into subscriptions, and as Apple really opens up the floodgates to all apps to use subscriptions, something like, what is happening? Something like this is going to happen. People are going to run away as fast as they can because they don't want to pay you every month. They don't understand why you want to get paid every month for the same app that last week cost 99 cents. I'll move out of this just so it doesn't induce any comments. But that's really my gut feeling, and I think that will be something that we have to see as developers and also as consumers, whether we accept this new model of subscription. So don't look at it as a solution, an immediate solution, because even though it might seem great on paper, users might not want this at this point, and it might take some time for them to actually get used to it, to actually get to the point where they're okay paying a subscription to an app on their phone, not a cable service or a phone service, but something that they may not understand the ongoing value. And as developers, it's up to us to really highlight that ongoing value. If you were before giving a few new additional levels or a few new content packs with an in-app purchase, now you're going to have to do more on an ongoing basis. So there's a pretty big, I think, leap that we have to take as developers, and we also have to wait and see what Apple does. If Apple allows every possible app to have a subscription, I think users will hate it, and they're never going to buy it again. And maybe in a year, they'll consider it, and that hurts all the other developers who are doing this right. So if you're thinking about subscriptions, which seem like a great idea on paper, do think about what the market itself is going to do with subscriptions and whether you want to take that risk right now. So mixing and matching, the next slide that you've been seeing for the last few minutes, that you can sometimes take a few of those and put them together. And really, it depends on your audience. Again, if you know you have an app that can sustain an ad, and you know that you have an app that has all those daily active users, and you can take and you can make some money out of them, you can also put in an in-app purchase to remove the ads. And in my own experience, that actually makes a ton more money than the ad itself. And that's something that just works. And in most cases, that's a good combination. Not all combinations are good, but we see them often. So the one really important thing about this is that you need to experiment. If you're trying something like this, go ahead and try different things. So let's give it a try. Let's see, I took two apps, and they both are used to take notes. They're both either standalone apps or apps that have a backend to share data across different devices. And let's think about the main questions. Who's the user, and what are our economics? So anyone who needs to take notes is a good user for this particular question. And when I say anyone, I really mean there's no specific niche or there's no specific type that we can say would want this more than or need this more than anything else. Now, we know that users with multiple devices would probably want this, and we know that they want something better than Notes. Notes has gotten a lot better recently, but if you take a lot of notes, not the greatest. So let's think about our economics for building such an app. We have a lot of clients that we need to build: an iPad, an iPhone, maybe even a Mac app, maybe a web app. We'll see. And we're going to have to maintain a backend. We're doing all the syncs, and that's something that's never going to stop. Now, it's not going to cost us a lot to maintain the apps because we're doing something relatively trivial. We're taking data from a server and we're putting it on the screen. If anyone hates me for this, we can talk about this later. My level of trivial is different. And if you said subscriptions, you'd be right. We could have taken a paid upfront cost, maybe even try to amortize the user into 4 years, I don't know, 3 years, come up with a random number. I don't think any of it will work. We could have done ads, but no one wants to write and put ads inside their phone. I would never want to do that. And in-app purchases could work, but subscriptions do a much better job. So let's take a look at 2 apps that did this in 2 different ways. One is Vesper. The other is Evernote. One is sad, and one is happy, barring any unicorn issues, but that's for a different talk. So Vesper recently died. It shut down because it couldn't be sustainable. They had a back end. They wanted to grow, but they couldn't because they were charging $4.99. Now you're thinking to yourself, $5 is a lot of money for a Notes app that I already have. So that risk for users is actually really high. They go into the App Store and they see a bunch of free apps, and then they see one paid app. Probably think to themselves, oh, but John Gruber built it. But that was not enough to actually keep them around. And when I talked to Dave, I happen to know Dave, he said that they couldn't actually pivot fast enough. So if they had chosen from day one to go with something more useful, they could have built the app around that, as opposed to now having to pivot while the app is in production and not making enough money to actually sustain the back-end costs. So that should be a lesson to all of us. So experiment and iterate. This is a big one. If you take anything from this talk, it's please experiment with your pricing. Please, please, please. Now, I used to be so afraid of this in my own, and with appFigures, with anything that I've done, because you sell something to someone, and then the next day you sell something, that same thing, to someone else for a different price. If it's higher, the other person is going to say, well, yesterday you sold it to my friend for more, for less. If it's lower, the guy from yesterday is going to come back running saying, hey, give me my money back. Now, you probably think this is how it happens, and that's how I used to think. That's not how it happens. No one notices. No one cares. Like 2 or 3 exceptions, but that's fine. They're usually friendly. So everything, every single strategy that I cover today is easy to experiment with, whether it's in-app purchases and introducing new in-app purchases, subscriptions with new tiers, advertising with different ways of using different ad networks, or even paid pricing with using different prices for your app. There's no reason not to do it. And we know that one size never fits all when it comes to business. So my 99-cent app may look exactly like your app, but your users will pay $4.99 for yours because it has features I don't, features they need. So it's very, very important that you actually always build experimenting and iterating into your design. And when you do that, you have to set goals. So if you're trying to get more money, or you're trying to get more downloads, or you're trying to get more conversions, whatever it is based on your model, you want to make sure that you know what you're expecting. It's kind of like an A/B test. You need to know your A, you need to know your B, and you need to be able to say, yes, this is working for me with real data. Always think about how to track this data and how to keep your finger on the pulse. And I know this from experience because we ran appFigures for, I think, 4 or 5 years before we started with our first pricing experiment. And when we started, I was actually just having this conversation with someone in the crowd. When we started, I believe the market was very, very different. We started over 7 years ago. There were many, many less developers that there are now. And our user base was made up of people who were really into what they do, people who understand the value of analytics, and people who needed what we had to provide, because iTunes Connect was utter crap at that point in time. It was really terrible. And so we architected our pricing based on what those users wanted. Fast forward to 4 or 5 years, we're thinking to ourselves, maybe this is not the best pricing. Also, we've added a ton of features over time. We started with 1 report, a sales report. We now have 9. We started with just Apple. We have Google Play now. We have Amazon. We have Windows, Mac App Store, Apple TV App Store, all of the above. So we were thinking, give it a try, see what happens. So we bumped our price from $5 a month to $15 a month. Go big or go home, right? And that actually worked. We didn't see a huge drop-off in number of users. We saw some issues. And we gave it 3 months, and then we knew that 3 months was the period we'll need in order to actually try and see what happens. After 3 months, we decided to change it again. We reduced it to $9 a month. And that was also good. But after 3 months, we realized that's not it. That's not how we're going to continue making money. We ended up going back to $5 a month with a few other changes. But that was a long process that really allowed us to get a better understanding of what happens when a user looks at us and really compares us against everything else that exists. You know how many users were unhappy with this? Guess. 2. One on Twitter, which I responded to directly, and one sent us a ticket saying, hey, are you sure this is the right price? Because when I signed up a few months ago, it was different. That's it. I thought that Twitter was going to blow up and say, appFigures is crazy. But it didn't. And at the end of the day, now our pricing strategy is built around what now current users want and what current users are willing to pay and can afford. And that's really the gist of this. You should go and experiment with your pricing. And I believe it was Greg who spoke this morning who said that when he experimented with a 50% sale, he saw more sales. Now, continue experimenting. Eventually, you'll get to a point where you understand what works and what doesn't based on data and not just based on gut feeling. So let's review. I'm almost done. 1, we know that the appropriate monetization strategy is crucial to being able to make money on the App Store. And we all want to do that. It needs to fit your users. It has to be something they can afford and they can actually pay for. But it also has to make sure you can pay for your rent or your car or whatever it is you need. Your basic necessities. It needs to keep you alive. It's okay to experiment. It's actually necessary to experiment. And the most important thing is you have to track everything you do so you can see where things are going. You can see if yesterday was better than today or worse than today. Hopefully it was worse than today is better. And that's it for me. So say hello if you want to continue talking about this or you want to talk about your app. I'll be here all the time. And hopefully we'll grab a drink together. My name is Ariel, and you can find me on Twitter, or you can find me on my own blog where I say a lot of things. And I need to do a lot more writing. Or email me directly. And hopefully don't spam me or put me on a list. That's it.